Hello and welcome to On the Road to Treatment. Today, I'm Lauren Huffmaster and I'm the founder of Adventure Therapy, and I'm joining again with Jessica Buscho. We're both stage 4 cancer survivors, and we are impacted. I'm impacted by metastatic breast cancer, and Jessica is impacted by colon cancer. And this is Colon Cancer Awareness Month, so that's a really good, exciting thing for her. She can be a spokesperson all month long, just like she is for the rest of this year. Um, Today, we're going to talk about the language around cancer. The way we speak about cancer and speak about anything really shapes the way we think about the things in this world. And so many of the words around cancer are soldier, war kind of words. We're fighters, we're soldiers, we're battling, right? And then there's also the idea of the words that label cancer patients. Words like a cancer patient is talking about a disease and a treatment, but there's no actual discussion around the person itself, right? And in our society, we don't talk about a diabetes patient. We talk about someone with diabetes, but we don't apply these rules of language to cancer. We don't look at a whole person around cancer. We only label them with the disease and don't talk about the rest of the person. And that's a problem for a lot of people impacted by cancer. So, Jessica, good morning. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. We're excited to talk about this. So how do you feel about the term cancer patient?
So that's actually the word I use the most, or the term I use the most, because um, I find cancer survivor to be universal, but also a little bit misleading. I mean, we're all survivors from the moment we're diagnosed. You're surviving, you're alive, right? But sometimes it can be misleading, and people, if you say I'm a cancer survivor, people take that to mean that you are NED, as we call it in colorectal cancer, or in remission, as people call it in other cancers. So I try not to use that. And then the other word that I hear a lot is cancer fighter, which for me doesn't define me as a person. I don't consider my experience with cancer a fight, because the disease lives within my body. And that's a personal preference. I completely acknowledge that. And some people really like that. And some people like the analogy of the whole like fight like a girl or fight your cancer thing. And I respect that. But for me, that never really worked. So I use cancer patient, but I agree it would be nice to have another word.
And as you, so you identify as a cancer patient, but you are currently being treated for cancer.
Yes. Yeah. So maybe that's why I am comfortable being identified that way.
Yeah, and so a survivor, for those of us who are impacted by cancer, survivor typically means like we're done with the cancer process, like we're over that, we've moved on. And when you're a cancer survivor, it also implies that you're not going to, for lack of a better way, die of cancer, right? You've survived the experience of cancer, and many individuals impacted by cancer do not ever feel comfortable claiming that, cancer is something that is notorious for coming back later in different ways, mutating, spreading. And so to claim that, like, I'm cancer survivor, I'm done with cancer forever, we just never really quite have the assurance to use that term and apply it to ourselves. On my social media, my personal social media, I actually put first generation of true survivors, because I truly believe that in my lifetime, in my generation, we're going to have the cure for cancer. And therefore, me, who's living as a cancer patient currently, will one day be a true survivor, meaning we will eliminate cancer. But it's not until the time that we do eliminate cancer that I will feel comfortable claiming a survivorship status.
Yeah. And if you're like me, I'm a little too. So I feel like cancer survivor sometimes is trying to tempt fate a little bit. Seems like every time I get a little too confident, my cancer says, hold on, let me show you, you know.
Yeah, that's a common thing
Um,
in cancer. The day I finished chemo and I asked when I'd get my port out, my nurse said, "Oh, as soon as you get your port out, your cancer is going to come back." So I think that there's a lot of superstition around the cancer experience.
I just remembered the other term that I actually like, that I think people use sometimes is they use cancer thriver. I think that's, for me, I always say I'm living with cancer. And I think that I like the way that that frames it, that you can live your life while you're in treatment. Like being in treatment doesn't mean that you're just on the couch 24 hours a day or in bed for years of your life. There's so many experiences that we have, and in many ways the people that I know that are impacted by cancer are living more intentional lives than other people because they're so aware of how fragile life is. So I like that, cancer thriver. I haven't really felt the need to use it, but because I'm in treatment, I just say cancer patient. I think that's the most clear for me.
Yeah, I do see the thriver a lot. I haven't quite claimed that for myself. Not that I don't think I'm thriving. It's just a shift of mentality. Like I think the whole cancer label needs to me to stay in a medical realm of my life, and then the rest of me can be in a different realm of my life. I can be a founder, I can be a mother, I can be something else, but I don't always need the cancer attached to it. I think, but I see it a lot. Cancer thriver. Um, yeah, and then I was going to follow up on something else you said, but the patient piece really means you're in treatment. You're currently in treatment, and but that should never really be applied beyond that period of time, right? And after that point, it's the after treatment piece where we have to redefine ourselves, decide who we want to be defined as, and whether we want to even keep that cancer label at all. You could just be, a lot of people just say we're a survivor. You can be a survivor of any kind of trauma, but just to claim the survivor, and maybe the cancer wasn't the greatest the biggest piece of it. It sparked other pieces, but maybe the trauma was the emotional trauma, or maybe the trauma was relational trauma or financial trauma. There's a lot of other things attached to it, so they might just want to say they're a survivor because they just had to survive a lot of different things that were happening at the time.
Yeah, the word survivor is it's a really hard word because I've learned actually from being on social media that it is tied to a lot of different types of trauma. Um, because I started following the hashtag survivor to connect with other cancer survivors. Um, and I find I'm often seeing stories of people who have survived completely different types of trauma in their lives. And I think it's almost too broad of a word, but yeah, I mean, there should be, just like we talk about how the kids of cancer patients need a word that, other than cancer kids, like, which is not a clear definition. Same thing for us too. And I think maybe it doesn't have to be universal, but it's really important that it's personal. Um, I appreciate it a lot when people ask me, like, how do you like to define your cancer experience? It makes me feel like they value that everyone has an individual way of facing cancer.
Yeah, but it also just shows that they're willing to learn about your experience, right? They're not just putting you in a box of around cancer. They wanting to know how you experience cancer, what it means to you, and how it's changed you. Um, that yeah, you said the cancer kids. Again, we're talking about the disease defining the children, though. I always use my language. Person impacted by cancer. It's super long. It's not catchy, but I don't know how else to say it at this point. I really hope that I have a dream one night when the perfect words come to me and I can capture that. But yeah, we talk about my husband or caregivers, like co-survivors, caregivers. He's so much more than just a caregiver who's like taking care of my physical needs. He's walking through this with me. And so to have words that describe him and the children, it's all very important because like I said, our words define how we see the experience. And to not have a word that expresses the children's experience or the caregiver's experience, the spouse or the partner's experience, is because the culture on cancer doesn't really see how it's impacting them, right? I actually had a conversation with someone at a major organization, and she was didn't even understand how the family unit applied to a cancer experience. And I kept saying, like, well, my cancer impacts everyone around me, and she just couldn't even get it. So I think there's still just blind spots in the cancer experience where we're not seeing the big picture. I did see that image recently, and I guess it's pretty typical in like the wellness communities, but to see people as like gears and sort of mechanical. So like they fix your heart, but they leave your lungs alone, and they don't really see that. And you're only fixing one piece at a time to make the whole thing run better. And how the medical community has spent so much time seeing us as sort of a machine more than maybe a garden or an ecosystem where everything's interconnected and you have to have soil to feed the trees and the air, and everything runs together symbiotically. And I think that in many ways we've defined all the gears in our cancer experience, but we haven't looked at how they play a role as a bigger picture.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, I actually was in a conversation this morning with somebody, and they called their spouse their care partner. And
Mm,
I really liked that partner word. Um, and then he said, you know, that word doesn't even really describe what he does for his wife. Um, and I thought that was just beautiful. He talked about the things that he does that are not care partner or caregiver specific, you know, not just helping her up and down the stairs, but doing things that he knows will make her happy and improve her quality of life while she's having a hard time on it. It's so much more than care. It's so much more than, you know, acting like a home nurse. So there is the emotional component too, that these are our caregiver or care partners are going through with us also. So yeah, it's an ecosystem.
And at Adventure Therapy, we're very interested in this whole person, the emotional side of cancer, when so much of the organizations out there in medical community really looks at the physical, where we really are trying to focus in on the emotional, and to acknowledge the people and what they're going through as post treatment, through treatment, all of it. Survivorship is a very lost kind of experience. You end your treatment and then you go off into the world, and you may or may not come back to the medical community. And so you're just sort of out there figuring it out on your own. And we call them survivors, and that we call that part of our experience survivorship. But the emotional part of the story is often lost. And so we don't have words around, we don't know how to articulate the experience, right? There's not a roadmap, and there's very few words to articulate what to expect in the emotional side effects of cancer.
Yeah, what do, as a breast cancer patient or survivor, what do you call it when your cancer is responding and well enough that you can take a break from treatment or something like that, especially in the metastatic setting?
I haven't experienced that yet, so I don't know. But I mean, I think we would say remission.
Okay.
A scan does say NED, no evidence of disease. So if they cannot see any kind of cancer on my scan, then they say no evidence of disease. But I think when you push the cancer back long enough that you can quit treatment, then you would say you're in remission.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, in colorectal cancer, they don't use the word remission really at all. Um, and I think that's because there's a very high rate of recurrence
Mhm.
compared to other cancers. Even in stage 3 and lower cancers, well, especially stage 3, I think there's still like, if you choose not to do chemotherapy, there's still a pretty high rate of recurrence, even if they thought they got clear margins in the surgery. And So I think they use NED because there's an assumption at this point that there's still some tumor hiding. Science is coming along really fast. I always love that you talk about that this generation will end the disease. We'll see the end of it. I believe that too, but in colorectal cancer, there's new ctDNA monitoring tools, which is where they test your blood like really regularly for just like a tiny bit of cancer DNA in your blood, to find recurrence before it's big enough to show up on a scan, to try and prevent real issues where you have like a major recurrence. So I think that, science is going to come along really fast and help that. But for right now in colorectal cancer, they just call it NED because I think which is no evidence of disease yet. So, because there's not a lot of cases, I think, there are very few where people fully respond to treatment in the metastatic setting. Percentage wise, there are.
Yeah, I have two thoughts. First, I am labeled metastatic breast cancer survivor, or I'm living with metastatic breast cancer, but then currently I'm living with NED. So sometimes I feel like I'm stuck in between, right? Like I tell people I have metastatic breast cancer and they assume that I've got it like sort of all through me, or, I could have a lot of things going on, but instead I'm have the highest bandwidth of cancer with zero evidence of it showing up in my body. And so I feel like I can't really claim either one. I can't claim that I have no cancer because I'm actually being treated for metastatic, but I don't really feel like I should be claiming a metastatic status when I don't have any cancer. So I'm always like wondering how I'm supposed to introduce myself, explain my story when I can sort of live both with no cancer and the most amount of cancer at the same time. That's where I live. But there's no words for that. And it might be just that we haven't had the time for women to live in that place before. No one, like you said, technology is catching up, and it might be one of the first. I might be the first generation where women can live in this place with a super high stage of cancer with actually no cancer in my body, and live in that space for a long time. But there's no words for it. So it's a difficult situation, but I do think that there's so much changing around the cancer experience that our language needs to catch up. The awareness needs to catch up. And for that to happen, our words need to catch up, and we need to talk about it and articulate what's going on, just like we're trying to do with the two of us together today.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. It seems like the the treatment that I'm on right now in the clinical trial setting sort of seeks to treat your cancer like a chronic that you can live with, without destroying all your other organs like chemotherapy does. And when I explain it to people, I explain that it's sort of like how diabetics live and they take insulin and it keeps them, they still have diabetes, but it's managed. If they stopped their diabetes treatment, then they would not be doing very well. So I think that the type of treatment that I'm on, I think, is the future of cancer for now until we find a way to completely eradicate it. But when I talk to doctors or other people in the medical profession, it sounds like that's where we're closest to managing the disease, is managing it like a chronic illness. Sort of what you're talking about, where you're a metastatic patient, but you could get to a point where you can't see it on the scans, but you have to continue doing whatever you're doing to keep it at bay. Basically, you can't walk away from the medication. But this is a new approach, like within the last 2 years. So the language just hasn't evolved yet.
Yeah. So we need to come up with something. But going back to how we're going to track it, and I get regular blood work, and they have two markers where they can see inflammation in my blood. And so, and you were saying that you have a similar marker. And one thing that's interesting, and I want to tell a story just because I'd never actually seen or heard of someone who had
our doctor had used it sort of properly. A lot of people, I don't know if this is new technology either, but a lot of doctors don't believe in tumor markers and following them because they can be inconsistent. They don't exhibit in every person. And so some people might have tumor markers in the very, like, you can track them like data, and some people might not have them at all. Or they're just all over the place and there's no symbol, there's nothing to follow. And but for the people who do have them, I think they're very, very important because they what happens is in your blood when the cancer starts to grow, and I'm pretty sure this is what happens, it sets off sort of a inflammation pulse that goes through your blood, and your blood work can pick up on this pulse almost 6 months before the cancer will show up on a scan. That's a long time for the cancer to grow and you just not even be aware. And I just met with a lady last week, and her doctor saw this happening in her blood. Her blood work showed the pulse go, and her numbers went up, and then they checked it again the next month and they had gone up again and nothing was showing up on scans, but her doctor started to act anyway. And they said, you know, this is happening. We see that the data, the increase in the inflammation in your blood, and therefore we're going to start talking about treatment. And so she was able to start even before the cancer started to spread in her. And then after 4 months, I think they were able to find a small bit of cancer in her lymph nodes. But from there, it could go very far if they hadn't been tracking her. And she had already completed treatment like years ago, and they were still just tracking this in her blood and were able to catch it before it spread throughout her body. And I was just so encouraged because I mean, they literally could have saved this woman's life. Like, if she wasn't paying attention, it could have gone from her lymph nodes into her brain, into her lungs, into some other part, and she wouldn't have known until it was really metastasizing quite a bit. And she was feeling bad before she would have come in and had someone check her out. But instead, her doctor caught it before anyone, before anything could happen. And they were able to, take it out and stop it right there at the very beginning. And, these are the kinds of things that are going to make us live longer with stage 4 cancer. I don't even know if they're going to label her stage 4 because it's still in the same region as her original cancer. But just the fact that they could capture it before it was there, like before it was visible, they're able to capture it, and that will extend her life just probably decades.
Yeah, and actually in metastatic cancer, I know you know this, but there are some areas that respond to treatment better than others. For example, they're finding out like on immunotherapy, if you have lung mets, they respond better than liver mets or other ones. And there's particular areas in the body like the brain, the peritoneum, things like that, which is the lining of the stomach. So anyone that doesn't know, but those areas are not particularly responsive to traditional treatments. So if you can catch anything before it goes to one of those places, it's just fantastic. For me, I was not tumor marker expressive sort of before I ended up having the brain mets. And then after that, for some reason, all of a sudden I started becoming tumor marker expressive. In colon cancer, it's called your CEA. And it has helped us make treatment decisions so much over the past year. And it's been like just great. And then, like I mentioned, there's this other blood test that's coming along, and they're developing it in colon cancer first, and then they'll try it in other cancers. But and there's actually a clinical trial going for it right now. If anyone is watching this and they're a survivor and is interested in trying it, if you have colon cancer, but there, if you're stage 3, for to give you less chemotherapy, because the colon cancer chemotherapy causes pretty severe neuropathy, which can actually disable people. So they're trying to give people less and less of it and really only give it if you absolutely need it. So this kind of thing not only can catch recurrence faster, but it can also minimize the amount of chemotherapy you have to have if you are a lower stage person. And then, because it's really hard, especially if you're an older person and you already have decreased dexterity, to have crippling neuropathy, which is like the loss of sensation in your hands and feet. People fall, people can't open things. They can't drive anymore. Like there's a lot of ways that this chemo can disable you, when really maybe if the surgery and a few rounds of chemotherapy took care of it, then you could avoid having neuropathy too. But I love that story. That's sort of like what this clinical trial is aiming for, I think, too. Also, besides limiting the amount of chemotherapy, also just to be able to stop things from going crazy. Because I think that people don't know that your cancer has to be a millimeter or bigger really to show on scans, and really 1 millimeter is questionable if it'll show up. But by the time it's a millimeter, it sounds small, but it's pretty big. A millimeter can feel like a lot.
Yeah, the lady who called me, she was, of course, devastated. Her cancer had come back, and I was like elated. I was like, I said, your doctor is like, I mean, of every doctor in the world, I think you probably had the very best doctor you could possibly have, because I've never heard of a doctor taking those markers so seriously, being willing to act on them, being so proactive, and just catching it the second it showed up, the second it manifested, they were there to like grab it up. And so, yeah, I was very excited to hear that the medical community is looking at us and watching us, watching at least her. Her oncologist was watching her very closely and really just sitting there with her. I mean, for 5 years after her last treatment, still waiting and watching and trying to protect her body. And it was just very encouraging. But I wanted to move on. It is colon cancer. It's blue. The color is blue. So blue ribbon. I see you have one on. Is there anything you want to talk about for that?
I do, because I think that you and I know a lot of cancer patients, but this has also been reaching non-cancer survivors. And during Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month, I post facts every single day. I've been doing it for 3 years now. So my assumption at this point is that no friend of mine or no friend of theirs should be diagnosed late stage with colorectal cancer, because I've said this so many times that colorectal cancer is the only cancer that is preventable with screening. When you have a screening done, if a colonoscopy is a screening, they remove any precancerous polyps. So, or, they can find other issues that are going on with your GI system too. And there's a lot of misinformation out there about colonoscopy, and people saying it's horrible, or it's really rough. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but I've heard of people doing juice cleanses for fun. So if you're willing to do something for your health and you want to prevent cancer, this is the way to do it. I mean, the age got lowered last year to 45 for screenings, 40 if you are African American or other certain minorities, and even lower than that if you have a first or second degree relative with colorectal cancer. But it's getting easier and easier to get screened. And I always make myself available to people who have questions. But if people want to find me on social media, I'm at tenacious_Jess on Instagram, and I'm posting facts about colorectal cancer every single day, all month long. And I want people to get screened. It's preventable.
I actually had two women diagnosed this month, in the last 2 weeks with this cancer. And and so I instantly said, I have a friend, just if you need to know anything, she's done the research, she knows the information, she could point you in the right direction. So much of cancer, it's important to just have someone at your side, someone you can ask questions to, because the uncertainty can be very overwhelming. It can just really be a burden. And so just if you are diagnosed with cancer, find one person you can talk to. Just you can ask questions, you can run a side effect by, say, I'm feeling this, is this normal? It just takes so much stress off knowing that you have one person that you can call or you can text and ask information from. because even though their experience will not be the same as yours, they can at least give you a frame of reference, like, oh yes, totally, that happened to me, or I heard of this, or talk to this person, or whatever. And so find somebody who's similarly diagnosed, and eliminate that isolation in your life, because it doesn't take much. They don't have to be your best friend. They just need to be someone who'll answer their phone. So isolation is not something you need in your life when you're diagnosed with cancer.
Yeah, and I really want to plug that peer support piece because like I said, I was in another call this morning and people are talking about, this is for colorectal cancer awareness, sort of challenges that patients come up with, but people are talking a lot about how hard it is to digest the information that your doctor gives you they give it to you in medical jargon, and it helps so much to have someone who's been going through it to help you interpret what that means, because it's always been overwhelming, but right now when cancer patients are going to these appointments alone, it's especially hard. And the isolation piece becomes even bigger when you go into these appointments alone. And then I don't know if you're like me, but in the beginning, when I would go to the doctor, things would sort of go gray. Like it was a lot of words. I was overwhelmed. I didn't hear everything. So having my husband there taking notes, even if he didn't know what he was writing, he'd just write it all down. I recommend for people right now, if you're going to appointments alone, especially if you're newly diagnosed, ask your doctor for permission to audio record the meeting or the appointment. And then take it to a friend who's been going through this and ask them, what does this mean? Or what can I do with this information? Because trying to interpret it yourself or process it yourself is not a natural thing. We're meant to be together.
Definitely. And I mean, it is a physical thing too. Like when you become stressed, your brain chemicals change and you can't process new information at the same time you're stressed. So if you're going into these appointments and you're overwhelmed and you're stressed, you have this new diagnosis, you will not, it doesn't matter how smart you are or how much you try to listen, you're not going to be able to capture everything that's being said. So give yourself a break, find another solution, capture the information another way, and then take it to a friend, take it to your family, and let them do the work of interpreting for you. Very good information. Well, Jessica, it's so nice to see you. You look very nice today. Love your smile. I'm glad to know that you've made it through another week of treatment and that you're still doing great and your numbers are down and everything's going well. So thank you so much for your time today, Jessica.
Thank you. It was so good to talk to you.
And we'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Thanks for tuning in to On the Road for Treatment.